So the Jimmy Butler saga continues to move in a direction where both parties need to be honest and say enough is enough. Let's get Jimmy out of Miami. I understand missing a team flight is inexcusable, especially when you have a contract in Miami Heat. You're supposed to show up to things. There's expectations with any franchise, right? And I understand Jimmy Butler's side where he wants a max contract. But if I'm both parties here, one's got to give up here and say, you know what? I gotta just say enough is enough. And that's I think the front office of Miami Heat. They're trying to get the best deal out there. They think that Jimmy Butler has this value that teams are just gonna unload draft picks and assets, but that's not realistic. Here's the reality of the situation. He's 35 years old. If a team, let's say the Memphis Grizzlies, want to get Jimmy Butler, obviously he says he doesn't want to go there anymore. I thought he would have been a perfect fit in Memphis. But let's just say they get him. Well, the championship window shrinks a little bit because you got to deal with the Oklahoma City Thunder with all that draft capital. The Houston Rockets are only going to get better, especially you look at the rise of Amen Thompson, the maturity of Sangoon, Jalen Green still finding his footing. Houston is going to be a real problem for years to come as well. And then you got to deal with Jokic if Denver can find another piece next to that roster. Now all of a sudden it's like the West just looks impossible to get through. And in the Eastern Conference, right now you have the Celtics, you have the Cavaliers. The Knicks will eventually, I think, get in that conversation if they add some bench pieces. Then the Orlando Magic, I know they've been struggling with it. They have the injuries. They're trying to get their reps up, get some chemistry. But as they get experience with Suggs, Boncaro, Franz Wagner, now all of a sudden the East looks even more stronger. And then you have the Indiana Pacers, who are a scary dark horse team. So when you're looking at all this movement going on, do they think Jimmy Butler is going to move the needle for the roster to win a championship? Because once you get Jimmy Butler, you have to be in win now mode. Like if we get him, we are going after a championship. And the only team I think that fits that bill is the Phoenix Suns. The problem is they got to move up Bradley Beal, who has a new trade clause. So this situation is looking more dire as the days go on. So if I'm the Miami Heat, I'm just going to get the best deal available because we know we're not going to get a lot for Jimmy Butler. Because let's just say he goes to a team like Brooklyn, he'll probably opt out of his contract and test free agency. Even Jimmy Butler, he'll be surprised because he's looking for a max contract. He's not going to get that type of money unless it's like the Phoenix Suns, because the reports that Phoenix could potentially sign him for a max contract, which in their situation makes sense because Kevin Durant is older. Obviously, his window is getting shorter by the days because he's going to retire soon. Devin Booker and the other piece around him. You got Jimmy Butler, and I was like, okay, you got a nice little roster there. So I don't know what Phoenix is going to do there if they decide to add him to the core roster, but that makes the most sense. But if you look at Memphis, like, yeah, you could add him, but now you are saying, okay, we got to win a championship sooner rather than later. And then you got to deal with all that draft capital with OKC. They have the potential to add another superstar with how many assets they have available. And then the Celtics, they're still going to be there. And we already talked about Orlando, their young basketball team. So a lot of organizations are going, okay, Jimmy Butler's great, but he's not the needle mover that we need to get over the hump. So Miami is dealing with an uphill battle when they're negotiating his price and what they want in a deal. They got to be realistic with the expectations. They got to go and say, okay, let's just get a couple draft picks, get a role player, and just reset. Because once you get off Jimmy Butler, you don't have a number one option anymore. If you expect that type of return, it's not going to be realistic. So for Miami Heat, it's time to move on. Because the longer you delay this, and the longer you say, you know what, we're not going to give into his demands, we're just going to go past the trade deadline and just let him walk in free agency. That's a bad idea. I think you got to get draft capital because we know in this CBA, you don't want to go above the tax threshold and you need to develop players. Now, Miami's really good at developing talent, but they can't also forget other things. What has won the championships? Big name free agents, big trades, Shaq, LeBron, Dwayne Wade. Obviously, Jimmy Butler didn't work out. But they got to get back to the roots where, yeah, they draft well, right? And they did draft Dwayne Wade. I don't want to forget about that. But they added Chris Bosh, LeBron, and you traded Shaquille O'Neal. That's what got them their championships. So if I'm the Miami Heat, I'm developing guys and I'm trying to build a core roster. Great, that's awesome. But you're going to go through a season where if you get nothing in return for Jimmy Butler and you got to restart from ground zero, that's going to be really ugly. Now, Clearware looks really good. I don't think he has this number one option potential, but he's another piece. Maybe you move off in the future. I wouldn't do it, but you get what I'm saying. You want to just compile, really good players to get that superstar player. But Miami has to have a plan going forward. You can't keep going season by season where you have these solid guys, but you don't have a top 10 talent on your roster. So, yes, Jimmy losing him for nothing would look really bad. And if you don't get a lot for him during the trade deadline, you don't have a lot of wiggle room right now. You're losing leverage as the days go by. And the suspension is a distraction to Miami Heat. It's not fair to the players that they have. And eventually, for the front office, you just got to move up Jimmy Butler. Now, for Jimmy himself, getting suspended again is a bad look because if you're trying to build your value and you're going to negotiate in free agency and you want a team to sign you for a large contract, that's not going to happen because a lot of teams are going to go, yeah, you're great in the playoffs, but we're going to need you in a regular season, especially if we need home court. And if you're not going to give it your all, if you're not going to show up when we need you during the regular season, we're not going to give you that type of money. So Jimmy Butler is playing with some fire here as well. I think you just got to be professional the rest of the season. 39 points in 3 games is not a good look. And then you're sitting on the bench by yourself, not engaged with the team. I understand the frustrations, but at the end of the day, you got to just humble yourself, to be honest. I understand he's been to 2 NBA finals. He's carried this roster. I get all that. He's got to just put his ego to the side and just recognize I'm 35 years old. And think about this. Let's just say a team decides to give him a massive contract, like the Paul George situation, and he regresses next year. That franchise is going to look really dumb. So I think some teams have a lot of reservations because they're like, okay, we know he's really good in the playoffs, but what if he has a situation in the locker room where he's just not happy anymore or something's going on? That's a legit concern. So the value of Jimmy Butler, if he thinks some team's going to give him like a super max deal or a large max contract, it's not going to happen. I hate to break it to you, I wouldn't do it. I would give him a deal. I would definitely bring Jimmy Butler on my roster. There's no doubt about it because we see him in the playoffs. He can rise to the occasion. He shows up in big moments. Those are all facts. But at the end of the day, we got to recognize, okay, we want to keep building for the future and we want to win now. And we have to deal with these other contenders like the Cavs, the Celtics, OKC's only going to get better. We know Orlando's going to get better. I wouldn't call it Orlando contenders yet, but as they get more playoff reps and more experience as a team, I expect Orlando to rise to the top of the Eastern Conference very soon. But they're a young basketball team. So if I'm Jimmy Butler or if I'm a franchise trying to improve my roster, great, but don't give out all your money to one guy. Like that's not a good idea. So it's just gonna be interesting to see how this all plays out. But again, if I'm the Heat, move on because the longer you drag this out, it's just gonna be a huge distraction in the locker room. And it's not fair to those guys who are giving it their all, playing hard, and still want to see the Heat succeed. And go back to your roots. Yes, it didn't work out with Jimmy Butler. It happens. It's unfortunate. Sometimes you build a roster, you get to the championship, you don't win it because you don't have enough talent. And I think where they missed the mark is during the summer after they made the finals. It was a surprise run, and they didn't make enough aggressive moves. I think they should have looked at the roster and go, yeah, we made the NBA finals. We shot the lights out of the ball, variances that weren't probably going to be in our favor the next season. They tried to go all in for Damian Lillard. Didn't work out, but they should have had a backup plan, in my opinion. You should have looked at other pieces that could help Jimmy and Bam because they still had a window, and I think that's where their front office dropped the ball, in my opinion. Look, the Heat are great at developing talent and putting a good roster together, but if you're going to the NBA Finals and you don't have a superstar who's on the same level or could be in the same stratosphere as guys like LeBron and Jokic, you're not going to win. It's just not going to happen. That's why you have to make sure when you put a roster together, you have a top 10 player. You have a guy who can go out there and compete with these guys. Because if you don't have that at the end of the day, well, you're going to lose the NBA Finals again. So if I'm the front office of Miami Heat, it is what it is. Take a step back, move on from Jimmy Butler. You still got solid role players. You still got a potential all-star player in Tyler Hero. And you still got pieces you can move in the future to attract a superstar player or get somebody in free agency. But you got to start from here. It happens. Sometimes things don't work out and a player gets unhappy. Just get it over with because it's too much of a distraction for the locker room. And it's not fair to a coach like Eric Spoelstra and the guys who are fighting for that team still. Hope you guys enjoyed this video today. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the latest saga of Jimmy Butler. What do you think the Heat should do next? Do you think they need to move on from him? Do you think they should just hold their chips and just wait till the offseason? Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel, and I'll catch you in the next one.